Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I want to chat with you guys a little bit about very high reps for hypertrophy and why this is controversial and why I think it's still acceptable to use them for this purpose in spite of that controversy. Now, usually when people are talking about very high reps, we're talking about stuff in the 20 plus rep range, but there are even arguments debating this regarding anything over 10, and this is by some people who are very knowledgeable experts themselves who discuss the problem of that. So the biggest issue we get to when we start talking about the really, really high reps is that the evidence showing that it can put muscle on you is in and of itself pretty controversial, meaning we don't have a lot of data showing that it causes long-term tissue changes. Okay. What we've seen is a lot of times with the very high rep stuff where they're taking sets beyond 20 to failure is that we see metabolites. We see anabolic metabolites in the bloodstream that are equal to that from traditional hypertrophy training, which people would think of as being in the 8 to 12 rep range, which we know isn't actually true. It's just what we used to think, and therefore it was termed that. But we do see the anabolic metabolites. Now, interestingly enough, blood flow restriction shows the same thing, which is, again, one of the reasons I think it's nonsense, because they never take studies with control groups comparing other high reps in it. So I don't even want to get into that topic, because when we bring up metabolites, people will bring that up too, but that's its own separate topic. I'm not a fan. I'm not a believer in it. But when it comes to a lot of the higher rep stuff, that's what we see. And the same thing that's been pointed out when you have these studies, and I think one of the leading proponents against a lot of this would be someone like Lyle McDonald. And I may not agree with everything that Lyle says, but to claim that the guy isn't extremely intelligent or knowledgeable would simply be false. He is. Okay? And I don't think we can dispute that point. You know, whatever personal opinions you have of him aside, you cannot dispute those 2 points. Guy is very intelligent, very knowledgeable. He always points out, and I think rightly so, that when you see some of these studies where they study this, they show lean mass and things on DEXA scans and MRIs, but the problem is that 10 days later it's all gone. In other words, when they quit the training protocol, something within like 10 to 11 days, if you test them again later, all of the muscle growth that they had is gone, which means that it's largely water. It's largely inflammation. It's water and inflammation if that is what they use as a primary training protocol. And then we get into the whole topic of the potential for differentiation between myofibrillar and sarcoplasmic growth. Now, for people who don't read exercise science or know biology at all, that's a mouthful. In short, the idea is that we have muscles are made up of sarcoplasm, as far as the cells go, which is basically the cellular structures and cytoplasm and everything in the cell. And that would be the sarcoplasmic part. And then the myofibrillar part is the contractile proteins. Okay? And your strength and your force production in a muscle comes from the contractile proteins, right? The sarcoplasm itself growing doesn't make you stronger. Now, the idea is that they tend to grow in a given ratio when you stimulate growth. They pretty well stay the same hypothetically. Okay, hypothetically, they stay the same. There's always been arguments back and forth to if you can bias that growth. Can you bias the growth of one towards the other? Because if you could, more sarcoplasmic growth would mean, in theory, non-functional hypertrophy. At least non-functional in the sense that the contractile proteins themselves. Now, some people could make an argument for energy, and maybe sarcoplasmic growth may be helping with really, really high volume training, or really, really high reps due to energy reserves and more triglycerides and glucose and everything being in there as a result of that, which might make sense. Now, is the data there to support that? I don't know that the data supports it. You could hypothesize if that's the case, because what is it that people argue may increase at the most anyways? Very, very high rep training. Well, if we come over to specificity of training, the specific adaptations to imposed demands, well, maybe that is true under the said principle. But again, is the data there to support it? I don't know that it is. I don't think that it is either. So I wouldn't take that one to the bank. Might not be wise. It's possible. It's a good hypothesis. But I wouldn't necessarily bank on it, because there really isn't data there to my knowledge to support it. In other words, when your 1 rep max goes up, your 20 reps max goes up proportionately. So we have the debate there between myofibrillar and sarcoplasmic growth, and you do have guys like Lyle and Minnow, Henselman, are both arguing that very low reps do potentially bias slightly towards more myofibrillar growth, and that something like maybe 10s would be the ideal ratio if you wanted to keep them in the perfect ratio they're at normally. And then when you start going to higher and higher reps, in theory, we might get a bias towards sarcoplasmic growth. Okay, that is the point they put forward. And that's a problem for strength athletes. It's a problem for people trying to get stronger if that is the case. And for me, everything I'm demonstrating in this video is above 10 reps. It's 12s, 15s, 20s. Some of the band, ultra high band work is, 30, 40 plus. So we get over to the whole point of, what if these guys are right? Does it mean this stuff is useless? And I would postulate that no, it isn't. Because generally those studies looking at the higher rep stuff, what is it they're looking at short term? In the long term, even if you're just causing swelling, if you're causing inflammation, what is it that we get out of it? We get better stamina in the muscle. We also are, again, if we're causing inflammation and water retention and extra glucose and everything in there, we're potentially creating a long-term anabolic environment. What else are we doing? Creating capillary beds might help clear waste products. Might get more efficient at clearing waste products, faster recovery of a muscle. Now, I would argue if that's the only way you're training, that's going to be problematic. But here's the thing. And when it comes over to the sort of these training styles that I personally promote, that we need to be doing really heavy work every week. What do I mean heavy? Weights above 90% every single week for both upper and lower body. At a minimum, that's what I want even all my intermediate and up clients to do. We hit max lifts for an upper and a lower every week. I personally hit up to 7 max lifts a week. That's how I train. If we come over to the whole point about upper threshold fibers and myofibrillar growth, that is going to create a bias towards that. And I think that's been noted even by guys like Knuckles, is that there is data suggesting that max lifts do hit upper threshold fibers and fatigue them in a way that going to failure does not. So if that's the case, we're already getting the potential to hit those highest tension movements, because that's what they're talking about here, is that mechanical tension itself could be one of the bigger drivers. And that's the argument some of those guys propose, because you have two arguments. You have mechanical tension being a driver of hypertrophy, and then we have training volume being the driver. And the current experts generally feel that volume is the driver. Well, let's come over and say, well, let's say that both have the potential. Let's say the difference is, we're talking about myofibrillar growth of the upper threshold fibers, maybe you're more tension related. Whereas in volume is going to determine overall growth. If you're utilizing both, and I think particularly if you're doing really heavy lifts for everything through the week, like let's say you hit a max squat and a max press of some type every week, you are absolutely fatiguing all the highest upper threshold fibers with that. And I would say personally, if you are utilizing styles like that, or even doing heavier work, you're doing triples and things, you are getting a lot of those benefits that we would be looking for with the heavier rep training. And I would say in that case, particularly if you're using mixed rep ranges, if your higher rep stuff is kept towards supplemental lifts, and particularly towards maybe muscles that are lagging the most for you, I don't think the other stuff is a downside. It's when we use these tools exclusively, I think that's where we're at the bigger risk of these negatives. But doing a bunch of 10s and 12s and 15s, I don't think is going to put you at a negative ratio on any of that if you're doing really, really heavy work as well. And I think that's where the fine balance lays. Are you doing both? And if you are, I honestly don't think that there are downsides to doing the higher volume stuff on the back end at all. It's my opinion. based upon the way I train, the way I coach my clients, the results everyone gets. All right, guys, well, that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.